So Andy Boy just asked how to avoid chasing the needle on approaches.
Ooh.
Don't do approaches that involve a needle. That's your first.
Enough said.
Yeah.
Take it from the expert
right.
of avoiding
Yeah.
chasing the needle.
Try not to overcorrect. I don't know. I feel like that's if you're over. I feel like if you're overdoing it, don't aim for like the halfway point. Try to get a correction that would get you like halfway there.
I would probably do it. Also, like some sort of autopilot system would probably do it.
Yeah, bracketing. What Rob is trying to describe is bracketing. So, like, you don't want to make these divergent oscillations. The closer you get in, like I'm picturing you're on the final approach course, the closer you get in, the more sensitive it is, and the quicker that full-scale deflection happens, all these things. So you need to make less and less movements to stay on. You'll get the same scale deflection while being less. You're not as far off, but you're getting the same scale deflection. That makes sense. It's like a cone, right? It just kind of comes into a finer point as you get closer to the runway threshold. So, yeah, you want less and less deviation. Over-controlling for sure. You want to get that dialed in, and that's why I am a big proponent of get on the final approach course, get on the glide slope earlier so that you have time to work that in, get your heading bug centered again, all right? Sync it up with what seems far out to be like keeping you on the center line as best you can, and try, obviously if it's way off, move it, but try not to reset that heading bug. Try not to reset that heading bug. And then as you get closer inside that final approach fix, what you want to kind of keep doing is only deviate heading. Obviously if it's way off, this is for, relatively speaking, normal days. Try not to go outside of the width of that heading bug. You want that to kind of be your barricades as to how far you're going to deviate. But that kind of only depends, winds change, velocity, direction all changes as you descend. And some of our biggest change is in that last 1,000 feet. So you can have some big variations, but I would say try and keep it there as a starting point, but get that dialed in further out on final, so that you have a really good rock-solid foundation, and then make your changes inside the width of the heading bug, inside the final approach fix.
Yeah,
that's as far as lateral needle movement goes.
Very fine movements. It's like on a boat. You don't crank that boat wheel around. You'll be driving all over the channel.
That thing all over the place. That's
Just do a light. Just quarter.
One side to the other. I want a toggle switch. All the way right, all the way left.
Yeah. No center rudder.
Nope. Well, okay. A three-way. Center, left, and right.
Spring-loaded to center.
Yeah. Spring loads to center, but I can just... That way I can...
It's like a bow thrust on the tugboat.
Yeah.
It has a bow thruster.
Yeah.
You just leave it in forward gear, dead center rudder, and just
bow thruster.
Do a little bow thruster to get you going in the right direction.
Yeah.
It's a true story.
Andy Boy said only fourth less in the air from the instrument, so calm.
TF down.
Down and do less the closer you get. Okay, so they'll let the needle deflection guide your corrections. Yeah, I mean, I guess mostly, but that what you're describing is super intuitive and is also still a problem for everybody. So it's one thing saying it like that, but then actually following through with it seems easy. When you see that needle go almost full scale and you're like, your instructor's like yelling at you, or you're like, oh, freaking out, I need to get over to it. You make this a big correction. And all you know, like without a solid scan, is all you know is you're making that turn. And so we're trying to just make sure, yeah, you're making the turn and you're being reactive with the rate of turn to the new heading, but we also need to dial in how far that new heading is when you roll out. And we don't want that to be more than, on a worst-case scenario, 10 degrees, okay? So, yeah, basically just try to meter and slow down the magnitude of your heading changes. Yeah, maybe roll in that aileron and get to the new heading, but don't make that new heading 20 degrees off. That's going to exacerbate the issue, especially as you get closer to you're like a trout swimming upstream type thing. So we want to make it maximum of probably 10 degrees off each side and then fine-tune it. And when you find something that works, recenter that heading bug so you're refining your bracket. But that's why I want you to get established further out on final. get a good idea, use that as your bracket. Maybe you need to go 5 outside of that heading bug then, but as you get closer and closer and closer, you'll need less, hopefully, unless the wind does something drastic, which I don't want to say should be briefed because I know I sure don't, but it should be an expectation. And if you're flying with an examiner or a DPE or a check pilot at your company or like a phase check flight at your flight school, I would probably say something about that, knowing you're going to need to crab to maintain the center line so that you're at least showing them you're looking ahead, you're thinking ahead. Like I've said before, when we think about the ACS and things like that, a lot of the concept is they're not telepathic, these examiners. So if you can at least describe what you're trying to do, although you may not be able to fully execute it correctly, you're at least showing them, telling them that not showing them, but you're telling them what your plan is. And like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. He's going to crab, 5 degrees to the right because the wind's off the right-hand side and he wants to track the center line. They're going to love all that. They don't know what you intend to do. So if you can tell them that, even if you can't execute it correctly when the time comes, they at least know that you know what you're doing or talking about, not necessarily able to execute, which is common. I can't do half the stuff I talk about. So letting them know that you at least know the nuts and bolts of what's going on ahead of time, I think that's goes a long way towards speaking to your proficiency or your understanding.
Yeah, just do smaller deflections and wait. That's kind of how I do it. Like to try to vocalize that intuition when you're actually in there, is you're doing a little bit, you're kind of taking an educated guess on how much it's going to take. You're putting that input in, and then you're holding it, realizing it's not going to be instantaneous change, and you're going to wait for, I don't know how long you'd wait.
Well, it depends on where you are on final. If you're further out, you have this time. If you're in close, you don't have that time.
Yeah.
So you need to dial it in mostly further out on final.
Oh, yeah, dialed in. For the further out you can dial it in and then just not overreact and keep it on the needles, the better you're going to be.
Right.
So
so we've kind of put a lot of emphasis on like seemingly localize, or in terms of glide slope, you want to know, and it's hard to find that picture perfect day where you have Mother Nature not really upsetting the airplane too much. But in terms of glide slope, you want to know about what pitch attitude and power setting is going to about what's going to maintain your 3-degree glide path. So like in most training airplanes, you're doing about 90 knots across the ground. Obviously factor in whatever you think the headwind component is, which again, don't need to necessarily brief it, but I would like you to understand it. So if you think you're going to be doing, it's a calm wind day, you're doing 90 knots across the ground. 90 knots divided by 2 is 45. Add a 0, 450 feet per minute. That is going to keep you on a 3-degree glide path. If you look at nothing else but the vertical speed indicator, that should keep you on the ILS 3-degree glide path. So that is a good starting point. Like let's say you have a 10-knot headwind. That brings you from 90 down to 80. So that means you only need to do 400 feet per minute to stay on that 3-degree glide path. Start there, and then you'll see on your, you can set your pitch, set your power to maintain the 400, for example, if you're doing 80 knots across the ground. See where that pitch attitude is, and then we can start to, when you dial those in further out on final, then you have only really 2 instruments. If you get that power setting adjusted pretty close, you only have 2 instruments to reference. You have your attitude indicator and your glide slope. So your scan can get quickened because you have fewer instruments to really worry about. For the most, we're juggling a lot of them. We're juggling airspeed. We try to be on it and all that stuff. With light GA stuff, yeah, you want to be close, but it's not the end of the world. If you're off. Yes, I know there's ACS thresholds. I get all that. But there's a time and place, check ride mode, totally. But for your practice, if we can eliminate and get it dialed in further out, and then once you get in close where it's really sensitive, if we can eliminate items in our scan, that means the few remaining items get referenced more frequently, which means you can be more exact and more precise on them. So that's my 2 cents there. or whatever.
Yeah.
2 minutes.
Good to see that. Scott, how do you do it?
I don't.
No. What about, you can picture what we're talking about, though, even though you don't have a bunch of time. I don't have a bunch of time on the needles. I was fairly decent at it just from boating.
I remember doing it. I just did very small corrections.
If you have access to a boat, you're like in a maritime area. I mean, just feeling what it takes like on a river or in a channel where it's kind of tight and you're at idle, keeping that boat, it's very easy to overdo the boat heading.
That's why you do all the way to one side and then all the way to the other side.
Yeah.
Let's do that back and forth.
That's when we got to the boat basin the one time. And Scott's like, you take it.
Yeah, I ain't kind of there. Unless I got people ready to push me off other people's boats.
Person on each corner of the boat ready to fend off.
Yeah.
Everybody's good.
I take the boat to Kelly's. I just yell to the dock hands, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yep. I know your type.
Yeah.
People with good, nice boats or with boating their whole life with a scotch and a cigar in the back are going, oh boy, honey, grabbed all the fenders. There's one of these guys going by.
Yeah.
I don't want them scuffing up our teak.
Yeah. The one time I was coming behind, there was a row of 60-foot nice boats, I was going behind them, and it was between that row, and then there was more boats behind, and I was just there was no wind, so I'm I'm just going to go as slow as possible through here. So I was going
which is smart.
Yeah, 2 miles an hour just creeping, and there's these guys hanging out on their yachts, and they're yelling, slow down, slow down.
So speed-wise, can speed affect when you're on an ILS?
Absolutely.
What are the pros and cons of slowing it down?
Well, so relatively speaking, you want to balance responsiveness of the controls versus configured to land. In a light GA airplane, you're I want to be, flaps 20 or, mid flaps. I can keep some approach speed, keep some, responsiveness to the flight controls. I want to be able to get back up on that glide slope or back over that localizer pretty quickly if I realize that I'm off. You're not supposed to get off, but if you do, you want to be able to get back. So you have that you need to worry about. I think I would tend to be more in a light GA. We always tended to fly about 90 knots indicated on final. And I think that's fine. That's well into flap operating range. I think that's good. We do about 130 or so on final. So if you think about it, that's not a huge gradient between a Piper Archer and a Learjet. Yeah, I mean it's 40 knots. I mean that's kind of a lot, but all things considered, I don't think it's that much for an airplane that does 120 and we do 460. Those are two totally different things. So,
yeah.
What's your approach speed? 130?
Yeah, 130.